And that leads nicely into our next conversation. What our lawmakers tackle has such an important impact on our seniors and beyond. And today we get started with the topic B'nai B'rith on Capitol Hill, a conversation with U.S. Congressman Tom Suozzi. Congressman Tom Suozzi represents New York's 3rd Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He served as county executive in Nassau County, New York. He won his congressional seat in 2016, and now he serves on the House Ways and Means Committee. And before that, he served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Armed Services Committee. And he also announced his candidacy for governor of New York just a few weeks ago. The congressman is a good friend of Israel, but he's really with us today to talk about some issues, international and domestic, that the U.S. Congress tackles and that B'nai B'rith cares deeply about. Congressman Suozzi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Dan, thanks so much for having me on, and thanks to all the good people at B'nai B'rith for the good work that they've been doing for decades and decades. Before we start, I just wanted to say one thing. I don't know if I told you before. I have a long affiliation with B'nai B'rith. When I was in midgets, Little League Baseball, my first team was the B'nai B'rith team. So I go back to when I was a little boy, being very close to B'nai B'rith. I don't think I knew what it was. I don't think I knew what it was in those days.
Well, do you have any photos? Next time we'll put them up on screen.
Yeah, no, I don't have a photo. I should try and find a photo like that. It would be good for me politically. You're right.
All right, well, let's get started with almost breaking news. The news yesterday that Senator Manchin will vote no on the Build Back Better legislation. That legislation includes in it a number of provisions that we have a great deal of interest in. Our Center for Senior Services, our housing program, really was looking to that legislation to provide additional funding for more senior housing. We're the largest sponsor of nonprofit affordable low-income housing in the Jewish community. But there are other provisions in there as well, prescription drug provisions, hearing aids. What do you see now as the future of this legislation? And if it's really going to lie fallow for a while, how can we deal with those elements of the legislation that impact on programs like ours?
Yeah, I can say pretty confidently that no one is going to say, not the president, not Majority Leader Schumer, not Speaker Pelosi, not the different members of Congress, are going to say, okay, it's over now, let's stop now. We're going to all keep on fighting to make this package in some form a reality. And there are so many provisions that are so important to all of us that we have to keep on fighting for. Those senior programs that you talked about, prescription drugs, reducing the price of insulin, capping the cost of Medicare Part D, money for housing, money for climate change. For me, the state and local tax deduction is my big priority. It's a big part of the House bill that's gone out already. There are so many important parts of this, the child tax credit. There are so many things that are just so important. So is it going to be that we negotiate a different package? Is it going to be we try and do pieces of the package? There's going to be a lot of conversations and horse trading and trying to figure out a way to move forward, given the fact that this has been a real body blow given to us by Joe Manchin. I mean, I've got a great relationship with Senator Manchin. I have dinner with him several times a year, but this is a real body blow to all of us. So we have to figure out how to regroup and keep moving forward. People from B'nai B'rith know as well as anybody that, life does not always happen the way you want it to in a straight line. You've got to go through a lot of twists and turns along the way to get to your goal. But I don't think anybody's giving up on their goal. And we don't want to wander in the desert for 40 years, but we want to try and get this done over the next less than 40 days to figure out how to resolve this issue.
Yeah, well, that's going to be my next question, but you just answered it. I was going to ask if you think that realistically within the first quarter of the year that there will be something, and you've said you think within the next 40 days. So that would bring us really, I guess, when Congress comes back after the holidays.
Well, my use of 40 was really a biblical reference.
A biblical reference.
As opposed to a planning reference. But the reality is that we can't wait, because we know that as soon as the first of the year comes, it's time to start talking about the midterm elections. And that's going to be on everybody's mind, and you're going to have the big concerns of the progressives, the big concerns of the moderates, people in the at-risk seats, The president is, going to want to get his agenda done. The further you get along in the year, the less you can get done. You don't want to see the Democrats wrangling amongst themselves. That did not turn out for us well in the November elections. People want us to get stuff done. We've gotten a lot of great things done. I mean, there's been really remarkable accomplishments, the most recent of which is the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure deal, of which I'm the vice chair of a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, which are 29 Democrats and 29 Republicans who meet regularly to try and find common ground. We helped to negotiate that. So we've got to try and figure out how can we find common ground here amongst the Democrats, from the progressives to the moderates. How can we find common ground to try and move forward in a way that's good for our country, good for our people, helps real people in their lives, and moves forward with a very important part of the president's agenda.
Let me ask you, I'm just going to take a little bit of a detour here because we have more questions about seniors, but about bipartisanship, because you just talked about it. This is, it seems to be a lost art in recent times. How do we move back to, I wouldn't expect both parties are going to be in lockstep on everything. That's not the way our political system works. But how can we move back to where we were? I mean, for example, I can think of, I think at one point, Bob Dole and Ted Kennedy, I think even had a short radio program that they used to do together, where they would talk about issues that were on their common agendas. How can we get back to that point, do you think?
I mean, the people are demanding it. The people are sick and tired of the far left and the far right and people attacking each other. And I mean, it's not productive. Why is it happening? It's happening because most of the seats in Congress, for example, are safe seats. If you're a Republican in the Republican district, you're a Democrat in the Democratic district, you're going to win because they're gerrymandered in such a way. The only way you can lose is by losing a primary, and very few people vote in the primaries. So the politicians are pandering to their base because so few people vote in the primaries that the small groups of people are controlling the conversation. The politicians pander to the extremes. Then you put on top of that social media. Who's popular on social media? The people who say the most extreme things at the edges. That's who gets followed the most likes, the most follows. Then you have cable news. It's not like journalism was when I was growing up with the major network channels. It's kind of the same news. No, you got the most popular show on Fox News is Tucker Carlson, 4 million viewers out of 330 million Americans, 4 million viewers. They're trying to sell advertising to their group. They get you excited. They get you angry. But they're trying to sell as opposed to inform and educate. And the same thing with the left on the MSNBC, the far left, the far right. So you have all these forces pulling us apart. And the thing we have to be most concerned about are our foreign adversaries, China and Russia, Iran, North Korea. They're using our freedom in our country, and they are sowing messages of civil unrest in our country. They're trying to get us to say, oh my gosh, everything's falling apart. We're all fighting with each other. Democracy's not going to work anymore. They're trying to push authoritarianism. But they are trying to sow civil unrest in our country. I think it has a lot to do with the rise in anti-Semitism, the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, the rise in dissension, the violent videos that you see, Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter. They take these kernels of truth and these burning embers of hate and distrust in our society, and they amplify them. And it's scaring the heck out of all of us. And that's what they want to accomplish. President Biden has talked about how Xi Jinping and Putin have both said to him, we don't think democracy can survive in the current world because of social media and the 24-hour news cycle. You can only get big things done through authoritarianism. You can't get agreement amongst people in this fractured world. That's why the bipartisan infrastructure deal is so big. That's why we have to get something done with Build Back Better. Even if it's not the way we intended, we got to get something done. We have to show we can do important big things working together.
Let's go back to seniors for a moment. Over the summer, you introduced legislation called the WISH Act. And this legislation creates a federal long-term care insurance program. Can you walk us through how the legislation provides long-term care, the funding mechanism for it, and how this bill makes long-term care more affordable for people who are priced out of the private marketplace?
Yeah, let me just say that long-term care is a big storm brewing in our country. You know it well from being all the senior issues that you've dealt with for so many years. We have 10,000 new senior citizens a day. 10,000 people turn 65 every day because of the baby boomers. That'll go on for another 6 or 7 years. 10,000 new seniors every day. And long-term care is a very, very big challenge for people. because there are less people to take care of their families. Families are smaller than they used to be. People are living longer, and people are moving away from their hometowns to other parts of the country. So you've got more seniors and less people from families to actually take care of those seniors. So it's a real storm brewing. I grew up in a house, all four of my grandparents lived in my house. Three of them were very sick. My mom was a registered nurse. We all helped take care of our grandparents. I took my grandmother to the bathroom as a teenager. I mean, you can imagine what that was like as a kid. And so my parents were very, very focused on getting long-term care insurance because they didn't want to put us in the same situation. And my mom and dad died not long ago. My dad in 2016, he was 95. And my mom died the year later, she was 93. But they had long-term care insurance because they had prepared for it. Long-term care insurance is not affordable to most people these days. It's very hard to get because the insurance companies said, listen, we did our actuary tables wrong, and we provided this long-term care insurance, and we didn't realize that some people would live for a lot longer, what they call catastrophic care, that you live with not being able to take care of yourself and not being able to do your daily living tasks of, feeding yourself or go to the bathroom or getting out of bed or getting dressed, and which makes you eligible for long-term care. But some people live for a long time afterwards. So my idea under the WISH Act, having spoken to many experts, is to figure out how to take catastrophic care. If you live for longer than a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, depending on your wealth level, the federal government's program will cover the catastrophic care portion for the tail. That'll get the insurance companies off the hook for the long-term care, and that will force them to be competitive with each other to provide affordable insurance products so that people can buy insurance to take care of their long-term care needs. It's funded through a payroll tax. Now, it's not very popular. Any tax is very unpopular. A very big part of me doing this is to get people to finally start talking about the storm that's brewing in our country. We need to build a consensus so that, my idea, which requires less than 0.5% between the employer and the employee of your wages, would go towards this insurance product so that the private insurance companies could provide this affordable long-term care insurance. So we want people to age at home. We want people to be able to die at home. We want people to be as independent as long as possible. Our nursing homes, our Medicaid system cannot possibly handle the volume of seniors that we have and are going to have over the next decade going into nursing homes. And it'll break the bank. So we've got to figure out a solution. People are starting to talk about long-term care more, which is good, but we're going to have to build a coalition and a consensus to move forward.
Yeah, amongst your colleagues, what kind of support are you getting? Your point is well taken. I'm reading through this, and there's no question we have a generational issue when it comes to appreciating any legislation that affects seniors. Because if you're 40 or you're 35, you're not thinking about that.
Right.
You're thinking about the present, and this is just, I think it's natural. This is what people do. On the other hand, God willing, everybody gets old. And I know that you've said that your family served as an inspiration for writing this bill because you saw this firsthand. How do we educate the population about the importance of looking ahead and understanding that these issues affecting seniors can't be left by the side of the road?
It's part of it's a marketing campaign and getting people to talk about it more often. That's why I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak to all of you, but we need to do more of it. Whenever I bring up this conversation with people, I'm flooded with stories. People in the exact same situation as me, they talk about the sandwich generation, people that are taking care of their parents and trying to raise their kids. They're caught in between in the sandwich generation. We call it the panini generation because it's kind of mushed together with cheese and it's messy. And it's people are having a hard time taking care of their parents. Everybody on this call knows of a family member that, they're trying to take care of their parents. They're getting older. There's nobody living there in the neighborhood anymore. There's nobody there to take care of them. I'm living here with my career. How am I going to go back home to take care of my mom or my dad? What am I going to do to make sure that they're safe? This is becoming a real issue for every family in America. The most effective politicians are the ones that say what people are thinking already. People are thinking about this. They're dealing with this. They're like, oh my gosh, I got to take care of my kids. I got to take care of my job. I have to live my own life. But now my mom and dad are in trouble, and I got to take care of them. And people, are feeling guilty that they're not around and available. So we've got to figure out how to address this as a society, so that families can take care of their parents and get the help that they need to do it. Because not everybody's going to have a registered nurse who can stay home like my mom did to take care of them full time. And so we need to have these insurance products available. The answer is not to warehouse everybody in a nursing home. It's not affordable, and it's not the best way to live in dignity as a senior.
Well, Congressman, I'd like to move, if I can, pivot to some international issues. You've served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Armed Services Committee, so you've had the deep dive into many of these issues. I want to talk about the talks in Vienna with Iran, with this idea of going back into the JCPOA. Most people in our community are deeply concerned about Iran for all of the reasons that we go over almost every day. Not only the nuclear program, there is the whole issue of support for Hezbollah and support for Hamas, these proxy armies that are strategically situated throughout the region in Yemen, and the Iranian anti-Semitism, which is every day threatens the destruction of the state of Israel. Just recently, in the front page of the Tehran Times, which is the English language newspaper in Iran, there was a map with red dots of all of the towns and cities that the Iranians could hit. And I think the headline was "Just try us." That kind of bullying, if you will. And yet there seems to be this eagerness to go and then go back and sit down with across the table from a party that can't be trusted. Where do you see this going?
Well, let me just first say, Dan, you know my record. My goal is to be known as the most reliable non-Jewish Democrat on the issue of Israel. I will be there every single time. My first speech in Congress in 2017, January of 2017, January 5th of 2017, was in defense of Israel against the UN. So I am 100% pro-Israel and will be there every single time on every single issue to defend our friends in Israel. I don't trust Iran. We can never trust them. We have to continue this maximum pressure campaign so that they will suffer the economic consequences of their bad behavior. They cannot be trusted. So I think that message is getting across to the administration. I think that they've been busy with a whole bunch of other things lately that I don't think there's been much focus on the Iran issue. I'm sure it's going on in the background all the time, but we can't trust them. Whatever we do going forward, we cannot put ourselves in a position where we have these artificial deadlines that end too soon that don't hold them accountable. Iran can very clearly, I just want to say very clearly, I do not trust Iran. We cannot trust Iran. They will not do something unless it's seen as being in their existential self-interest. And when you talk about Hezbollah, I co-sponsored a bipartisan piece of legislation that we passed called the Shields Act with Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin to try and hold Hezbollah accountable for their rockets that they've got using human beings as shields in Lebanon. I've been on every piece of pro-Israel legislation. I'm always one of the last holdouts, along with some of my good friends, to make sure that we get what we need, whether it's related to Iron Dome or related to funding without conditions. I'm a Democrat, of course, but I supported the move of the embassy to Jerusalem when President Trump proposed that. I supported the Abraham Accords. That wasn't very popular among some of my colleagues to be supporting something President Trump was doing, but I feel so strongly about Israel that I was willing to do that. And I will always do that. And whenever I hear comments from some of my colleagues, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, I've stood up to them on national TV and doing tweets. Again, I want to be known as one of the most reliable non-Jewish Democrats on the issue of Israel.
I have a specific question on the Palestinian issue, but let me again take another detour. Do you sense that we're re-entering a period of isolation or neo-isolationism? Terms of pulling back at a time when the threats to our interests abroad, and you mentioned a couple of them already, a couple of trouble areas, seem to be growing. Is there kind of a distaste, for lack of a better term, as we used to say back in the Vietnam era, for foreign adventures abroad? Or do you think that on a bipartisan basis, that core of support for having a strong American interest in international strategic issues is still there?
Well, there's no question that there's a very strong bipartisan interest in having core American values guide our policy. I mean, there's no question about that. And I think the president has tried to let people know that America's back, that we want to be involved. We just have to be careful not to use our resources in a way that's stopping us from moving forward. I mean, right now, there's no question that China is a strategic adversary, and a very serious strategic adversary that we have. And while we've been spending trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, for example, they've been, building more high-speed trains and more technology and expanding their economy and doing the Belt and Road Initiative and trying to influence the world, whether it's in nearby Pakistan or all the way to Africa and over to Latin America. So we have to be very conscious that our adversaries are being very active. I've always believed that what we need to do is identify who our core allies are: the United States, Israel, Australia, South Korea, other countries, India, other countries that share democratic values like ours, and use that coalition and try and expand upon that coalition to work together and try to do our best to reward our friends and to hold our adversaries accountable. Not that we want to do adventurism, as you suggested, by engaging in military conflict unless it's absolutely necessary. I mean, we have to be prepared to do that if necessary. But by using our economic strength and by using our influence and by using the power of our example, democracy and capitalism, to try and spread our influence throughout the world. But we really need to get together on our own shores as much as possible first. We always used to say, foreign policy, politics ends at our nation's shores. We need to get back to that concept again, that we're all in this together, and that there are dark forces in our world right now that are using, as I said earlier, social media, even cable news, and other vehicles to try and sow civil unrest in our country, to not like our own system. We have to be very conscious of that fact, and we have to push back against it.
Well, we've got time for just a couple of questions. One relates to the Palestinian issue. The U.S. has restored most of its funding to UNRWA, which is the UN's Palestinian Refugee Relief Agency. But anti-Semitic and anti-Israel content can still be found in Palestinian textbooks in UNRWA schools. In addition, the U.S. recently abstained on a UN General Assembly resolution calling for a Palestinian right of return, which would destroy Israel's character as a Jewish state and severely undermine the peace process. How can we encourage reform of the UN's one-sided, biased policies in ways that would promote stability in the region and address Israel's security needs?
Well, there's no question that the UN has been biased against Israel for a long time now. We started to see some glimmers of hope that it was getting better a few years back, but it's still a major problem for us. And we just have to continue to, as I said, build this coalition of allies that share our values to stand up together. We kind of went this whole America First, going alone type of effort that I was concerned was scaring away some of our allies from cooperating with us. So we need to look out for American interest. We need to applaud the pro-Israel efforts of the previous administration, but we also need to build a team. We can't go it alone. We have to build a team of people to help us with this, especially in international bodies. It's always a tough balance. We, number one, have to defend Israel, our strongest ally. We have to defend democracy. We have to stand up for our values. We need to be tough. And we need to hold people accountable that don't go along with our efforts. And militating against that at all times are human rights concerns. Wow, these poor people are starving in the meanwhile. What are we going to do to prevent these poor people from starving? And what can we do to build relationships and try and reach out across? I would say that the more I've been involved in public life, I was the first elected mayor of my hometown in 1993, took office in 1994, been around for a long time. The more I recognize there are just some people you're just never going to be able to trust. You're just going to have to do everything you can to force them to bend to your will. And in the case of the Palestinians' efforts, what we did with the Abraham Accords was so important to try and surround them with other allies that would help us to carry the message. That's so important. We need to try and build upon that as much as possible. We'll never be able to trust Iran. They are dead set on hurting us and hurting Israel. We have to accept that fact, and we have to keep the pressure on them at all times. So it's not a one-time thing. It's a period over a series of time that relies on values, and you have to continue to try and support your values at all times. Democracy, capitalism, human rights. Can't lose sight of those things.
Final question. You referenced anti-Semitism a little bit earlier. It is spiking all over. It's in Europe. It's in the Middle East. We see it everywhere. Social media is, you talk about viral. It is out there, and it's out there in with a tremendous kind of viral ability to spread. And we've got it right here at home. One of the things that we've done, we have hopefully the new special envoy who will carry the rank of ambassador for anti-Semitism. Deborah Lipstadt will be confirmed. I understand, I just heard today that I think the lock on moving on some of these nominations has been lifted in the last 24 hours. But we don't have here in the United States a person, an office that is designated to monitor anti-Semitic acts. And we've called for the Justice Department to create such a position. What role do you think Congress can play in addressing the spike in anti-Semitism here at home?
Yeah, we just have to keep on fighting all the time. Anti-Semitism is real. Anti-Semitism is growing. We need to recognize, I was a big sponsor of the Never Again Education Act. Education is a very big part of addressing this. We need to recognize that, in the old days, these hate groups could go out and, go put a flyer on everybody's car on a block, okay? Now they can just push a button, it could hit lots of more people and not have any fingerprints on it. And as I said earlier, our foreign adversaries realize that it's cheaper, that instead of buying a tank or a missile or a plane, they could put 500 people in a basement typing hateful messages on the computer and trying to sow civil unrest in our society. We need to be very conscious of our foreign adversaries sending these awful messages, including anti-Semitism. And I will do everything I can to fight against it. And I think that Congress can play a role, as you said, of trying to build more resources in our country, like we did with the Never Again Education Act, bipartisan support to try and educate people about the Holocaust. We can do more things like that. I would just want to quickly talk about that for one second, for the Never Again Education Act and the Holocaust. I went to the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, and in preparation for that, I read the book, The Band of Brothers. And they talked about how 2 or 3 days before freeing some of the concentration camps, the American soldiers were debating amongst themselves, hey, have you heard this thing about the Jews and what they're killing the Jews? Oh, no, that's a hoax. Nobody. This was going on 75 years ago, 2 days away from freeing the concentration camps. And those soldiers were debating amongst themselves whether it was true or not when they were literally miles away. So you can imagine with the distance of history, 75 years later, how much misinformation is out there and how people are trying to confuse people using misinformation, using social media. Tom Friedman talks about how social media is great for the makers, the people who want to do great things, to share ideas, but it's also good for the breakers, the people who want to tear us apart. We need to be vigilant with these new ideas and new technologies of social media, cable news, foreign adversaries. We have to be vigilant to attack these problems. The veneer of civilization, Tom Lantos, a Holocaust survivor and former congressman, said, the veneer of civilization is paper thin. We are its guardians, and we cannot rest. And I won't rest, and I know you won't rest. And together we're going to fight back against anti-Semitism and all this hateful behavior.
Congressman Suozzi, thank you for your friendship, for your longtime support of the state of Israel, and we truly appreciate your being with us here today. Best wishes for the new year.
Thanks so much for having me. Toda rabah lachem to everybody on the call. I forgot to greet everybody at the beginning. I should have welcomed and blessed everyone in the beginning and said, Bruchim habayim. So blessings to everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.